Divorce is never easy, especially when it involves infidelity and public humiliation. Picture this: a family torn apart because a mother made a mistake. She cheated on her husband, my father, with a close family friend. The devastation when my father discovered the truth was immeasurable. He chose to divorce my mother, despite her pleas for forgiveness. But he didn't stop there. He aired their dirty laundry for all to see, turning a private matter into a public spectacle. He painted my mother as a villain, broadcasting her mistake to friends, family, and the world online. This not only humiliated her, but it also caused our entire family to crumble under the weight of shame. The fallout of this situation has been nothing short of catastrophic. My mother may have been the one who cheated, but my father's actions only amplified the pain. His anger and resentment, spewed out in front of me, have only added to the trauma. While my mother was the one who cheated, the way my father handled the situation only added to the pain of our broken family. In the aftermath of the divorce, the wounds were far from healed. It was like living in a storm that never seemed to pass. My father, once the rock of our family, continued his tirade against my mother, his words echoing like thunder in the quiet of our home. It was a resentment that was as evident as it was harsh, a hatred that seemed to consume him. I was caught in the middle, feeling more like a chess piece than a son. I felt his anger, his betrayal, but also his pain. Yet it was his constant, hateful words against my mother that were most difficult to bear. They were a stark reminder of the love that once was and the family that no longer existed. His bitterness was turning our home into a battlefield, a place of constant conflict and tension. My father's hatred was making things worse, not better. I felt more like a pawn in his revenge game than a son. I was torn between my parents, angry at my mother for her actions, but increasingly resentful of my father for his bitterness. My heart was a battlefield of emotions. On one side, there was my mother. Yes, she had made a mistake, a big one. Yet it was hard for me to hate her completely. I still loved her. She had been a constant source of support and love throughout my life. On the other side, there was my father. His behavior was becoming more toxic and unbearable. His words were like poison, seeping into my thoughts and tainting my perception of my mother. I understood his pain, but his relentless bitterness was beginning to make me despise him. It was like being caught in a storm, with waves of anger, resentment, and confusion crashing over me. The love for my mother, the resentment for my father, and the overwhelming toxicity of it all had me gasping for breath. I was sick of so much hatred. I just couldn't take it anymore. The day I turned 17, I made a decision. I decided to confront the maelstrom of anger and resentment that had become my father. I spoke to him from the heart, telling him I couldn't bear to be around his toxic hatred anymore. I pleaded with him to seek help, to heal, to let go of the venomous obsession that was tearing us apart. My words, however, fell on deaf ears. He chose not to listen, not to understand, but to persist in his caustic disdain for my mother. I gave him an ultimatum that day, a choice between his son and his rage. I told him, "Dad, if you don't stop this, if you don't heal, I'll have to cut contact with you when I turn 18. I hoped, against all odds, that he would choose me, but he didn't. He chose his hatred over me. I was another traitor in his eyes. Getting kicked out of my father's house was painful, but it also brought a sense of relief. As I walked away, the weight of his anger and resentment seemed to lift. I was no longer caught in the middle of a battlefield. It felt like I had been holding my breath underwater for years, and suddenly, I could breathe again. I was no longer a pawn in a game of revenge. I realized that choosing peace over pain, love over hate, wasn't a sign of weakness, but of strength. I wasn't betraying my father, but reclaiming my life from the toxicity that he had wrapped it in. Yes, I was called a traitor, but I knew I was just a 17-year-old trying to navigate through the wreckage of my parents' failed marriage. I was a son, choosing his own sanity over the bitterness of a father's revenge. The decision was difficult, but it was the best thing for me. I chose peace over pain, love over hate,